Welcome to the second part of the Gothic video. In this video, I will talk about the myth of the vampire, which has a very popular place in Gothic culture. I'm sure many of you already love this topic. I think this subject became very popular after 2010 with the Twilight series. Other than that, it's already an interesting subject. Let me tell you why this is an interesting topic for me. Because immortality. One of the things that immediately comes to mind when you think of vampires is the notion of immortality. I'm not the only one who's into this, by the way, because immortality is a phenomenon that humans have been chasing and trying to find since the beginning of their existence. Most of us fear death, even if we prefer not to talk about it. We don't know what happens when we die, so we don't dwell on it too much. We blend into life, we feel comfortable with everyday preoccupations as if we will never die. But when you think about it, death is a very thought-provoking thing. And we know we are going to die more than other living beings. Having this consciousness makes everything more complicated. Imagine I put my hat on the pillow at night and I say to myself, why were we born if we are going to die? I exist, and then I lose it. It's meaningless. What happens when I die? What will happen when I lose this physical body? Is there such a thing as a soul? Does the soul go somewhere after you die? Will that soul live forever wherever it goes? What is eternity like? Such questions. I'm trying to figure it out, but no one has figured it out. Yes, it's a phenomenon I never stopped thinking about. Maybe I think more than most people, by the way. I worry more. Maybe it may seem strange to you, I don't know, but the thought of losing my existence terrified me. Not being able to see the people I know, liked to know, loved. Imagine they go with you, the memories go with you. You lose everything, as if you never had it. And we live with this tragedy, even if we don't tell ourselves. This is the pathetic drama of being human. If I were a cat, I wouldn't be in such agony, or a vampire. If I were a vampire, I'd never die. I would live for centuries. Do any of you want such things? Or are you obsessed with that like me? In general, people doesn't give a fuck this status at all. They are already promised a different life after that according to their beliefs. So, this life is not like the real life for them. The hereafter is the real life. So for them there is no such thing as disappearing when they die. I don't know, I'm not as sure as they are, so no one comes back from the dead. Nobody came and said, when you die, another life starts, like if you are a good person, you live forever in heaven, or if you are a bad person, you burn in hell forever. We cannot know that. But at this point, I would like to change the subject from us to vampires. And I start talking about vampires, beings that live forever. No, first of all, what we call a vampire is another type that emerged out of fantasy fiction. No one came up with this kind of creature. The vampire is as old as human history and exists in all mythologies. Of course, in the periods we call archaic, they were depicted as blood-drinking creatures and blood-sucking evil spirits. These beings are not called vampires. It also varies from place to place. For example, in Indian mythology it's called Kalika. It's called Sasabonsam in West Africa, in Pundulu in South Africa. In Chinese mythology it's called Jiangshi. Jiangshi is the jumping vampires, but some sources refer to them as zombies, as the living dead. The vampire has also died before and resurrected, not in the Balkan Dead way, but in the zombie way. Lamia in Greek mythology is one of the thousands of people Zeus fell in love with and incurred the wrath of Hera. It's a classic. Hera turns this woman into a monster. After she becomes a monster, she drinks the blood of her own children. There is Strigoi in Roman mythology. For example, Bram Stoker's Dracula is a modern interpretation of the entity. There is also Lilith in Babylonian, Assyrian, and Hebrew myths. The connection between Lilith and vampires is like this. If you search on the internet, you will find a series of mythological narratives. Let me tell you the truth about that too. But before that, let me say that this connection is a mythological speculation. It's all fiction. The story is that Cain is expelled from heaven for killing his brother and he takes refuge with Lilith. Lilith can also be seen as the ancestor of vampires or as being who gives them power. Lilith, by the way, is mostly mentioned in the Jewish faith and she is a demonic, evil woman. A character portrayed as the opposite of Eve. That's why it fits in so well with the vampire and witch labels that followed. In mythological beliefs, there are also rumors that vampires are created by witches through magic. They are created by black magic. Lilith is a witch and Cain is a vampire. Isn't that a good story? Everything complemented each other. But it's a fiction. Inspiration for the fiction is a reference to the sin of Cain in Bram Stoker's work. When the character Mina is bitten by Dracula, a spot appears on her forehead. Cain's sinful mark was revealed, says Van Helsing. From this detail, the story of Cain resurfaces. Although the vampirism and religious attribution I have described is fictional, it doesn't change the fact that it's an entity that has been adopted as a belief in the mythologies of other cultures. For example, people living in Balkan countries believe in vampires just as we believe in paranormal creatures. Think of it like local horror stories. But vampires are seen as fiction, which seems very strange to me, so if there are paranormal things, there are vampires too, logically. The level of unreality or reality is the same for me, but witches, fairies, vampires, goblins are looked at as if they were fantastic fiction. By the way, in academic sources, 400 years ago, these beings were really believed it. They were taken seriously, they were taken as real. Are being said, I'm losing it, still believed. Sometimes there are things in the news, things like the scary bride caught on camera, Slender Man. There are tons of allegedly real haunted house contents on YouTube, as if it was real. So paranormal things should not be seen only as medieval superstition. We can't say this is a thing of the past, that we are very modern now, that we have left it behind. Besides, it would be good for me, it will be nice if a vampire bites me. I haven't traveled the world yet and I'm almost 30, so they need to find me as soon as possible now. I live in Turkey anyway, so it's very relevant to the vampire. Do you know why? Let me explain it right away, because you will see that is not a concept very far from the Turks. I'm going to talk about the etymology of the word vampire. The oldest root is upur, and this word comes from upur in the mythology of Turkish tribes such as the Cumans and Peşneks. Turkish fable dictionary Ubir, some in uses obur, hobur, vupar, opkir or opkan. The word derives from the root ub or ob. It means greed in Turkish, but we don't use just ob, we use obur in modern Turkish in our daily lives, and it means greedy. So now you've just learned a Turkish word. The word obruk, by the way, comes from the same root and means a whirlpool. Uber is an insatiable, randy, greedy creature. In fact, this creature is not the first figure that comes to mind when we think of vampires. In the Pontus Steppes, that is to say, directly opposite this Black Sea region but extending from that region towards Asia, ancient Turkish tribes of horsemen lived here. This is a myth that emerged here. Rumor has it that Uber is a sinner. In the grave, this person takes the form of an animal and becomes Uber, a being with a big head and long tail. By the way, it's said that usually dead wizards turn into Uber. It breathes fire from its mouth, can remain immobile or fly for days or months. That's how they are characterized. It spreads infectious diseases around. It eats whatever it can find. He disguises himself as a wolf or wild dog and mutilates the sheep. By the way, Finnish Ugric tribes have similar discourses. In the 10th century, under the influence of the Slavic-Turkish relations established in the Slavic language, this word was translated into the Old Slavic language as opere. As it spreads in the Balkans, it changed into Bulgarian opir, Serbian vampir, and Hungarian vampir. When it crossed into Europe, it became vampire in German and eventually vampire in English. In short, the modern word vampire derives from the Old Slavic language and its Turkish form. Some etymologists argue that the word is not of Slavic Turkic origin but of Hungarian origin. But the general acceptance is that it was passed from Turkish tribes to Slavs. Now that the homeland of the vampire, which would eventually evolve into its modern version, was the Balkan regions. When you think of Romania, the first things that come to mind culturally are already Transylvania, vampires and so on. Also, these regions are places where urbanization is low and rural culture is dominant. Places where the belief in the ghouls is dominant. A vampire is basically a ghoul. There are also religious bases for this belief, such as a person becoming a heretic in this mortal life or practicing witchcraft. Then, because it can't rest in its grave, it comes back to life and haunts people. Apart from this, I would like to share another interesting detail about the Turks. And what I'm going to tell you about is the family of the Vurdalak, written by Tolstoy. Alexei Tolstoy wrote The Family of the Vurdalak in French in 1839. The family of the Vurdalak begins, as is often the case in Gothic literature, with an evening gathering of intellectual friends, each guest telling a horror story inspired by their own experiences. There is a fiction within fiction technique in the book. The main character, Marquis, finds the stories interesting, but says, "What of these tales you tell? Listen to my experience." One day, Marquis' path falls into a Serbian village. The owner of the house where he spends the night, Gorcha, is an old man who left the house 10 days ago to catch Alibek, an outlaw in Turkish origin. Alibek is a bandit who ravaged the area. Old Gorcha tells his sons to wait 10 days while he leaves. Before he leaves, he advises them to kill him by driving a stake through his heart when he returns home if this time has passed. Because he says that even if he comes back alive after 10 days, he will definitely be a Vurdalak. The difference between Vurdalak and vampires is that Vurdalak is a type of vampire that haunts its own family and relatives and prefers to drink their blood. The narrator Marquis arrived in the village exactly 10 days later, and the events correspond to the day he was a guest. Marquis is very impressed by Zdenka, the daughter of the house. He falls in love with her. Let me give this information because it has an important place in the story. The night the Marquis is a guest, Gorcha returns home. It's been 10 days. Gorcha knocks on the door covered in blood and the house dog is very disturbed. Gorcha is angry that this animal has no respect for him. How can it not recognize him? Georgi, the son of the house, unfortunately kills the dog at his father's request. But at the same time, because it is the 10th day, they look at their father with suspicion. So, Zdenka asks his father to tell him about his adventures, because his father's favorite thing is to tell heroic stories. So they'll know if he is turned into a vampire. Gorcha says that he has eliminated Alibek, but is evasive, saying that he will tell the details later. He takes Alibek's head out of the sack on his back and says, "Let's hang it on the door as an example." And here he says something against the Turks. "Our village was saved from robbers. Expect for the Janissaries." In other words, the book also describes relationships between Slavic peoples and Turkish peoples. How they see them can be examined in this story. Then everyone goes to bed. Marquis notices that the old man approaching him smells like a corpse and has terrible eyes, but it doesn't hurt him. His grandson, who had already woken up in the middle of the night, called his grandfather and detained him to tell him how he fought the Turks. When he grew up, he would fight the Turks like his grandfather. In other words, here we see the anger against the Turks in the geography of the period reflected in the work. Then the old Gorcha and his grandson disappear. Then the grandson is found, but Gorcha is missing. Some nights they only see him around the house. Marcus has to stay in the house for a while longer because the Danube is frozen. One day, the old Gorcha returns and sits down at the family table. The children ask their grandfather to cross himself to check if he is a vampire, but he refuses. When Georgi realizes that the man is a vampire, he looks for a stake to drive through his heart and the old man runs away. Days pass. The Danube is melting and the Marquis can now set off. He was called to France, and since he had traveled in the same road, he decided to stop by home again. Because there is Stenka, that's why. Because he's curious about her. But he learned from a monk that Gorcha was killed with a stake through his heart, but before he died, he drank the blood of his grandson and made him a Vurdulak. The boy drinks the blood of everyone in the house, living on Zdenka, but the pain drives her insane. Despite what he has heard, Marcus still goes because he is curious about Zdenka. When he reaches home, he falls asleep from exhaustion, and when he wakes up, he sees Zdenka. He is very angry with himself for leaving her. Zdenka tells him that he must escape as soon as possible. Marcus notices that Zdenka is not the same, that her looks have changed, that the girl who normally wears cross necklaces is wearing none, and that she smells of corpses. Nevertheless, the man falls under Zdenka's spell and stays with her for the evening. Hearing horrible screams from outside, he tries to sneak out the door, only to find that the house is surrounded by a horde of zombie-like Vurdulaks. The man runs away without looking back and barely escapes from the Vurdulaks. Marcus tells it as his own story, and this was the beginning of the story. As we come to the end, the audience gathered around Marcus is getting chills because the Marcus says he ran away. But what if it's a lie? What if Marcus is actually a vampire? And this is where Tolstoy finishes the story. So he leaves both the characters in the story and the reader uneasy. In our country, the equivalent of a vampire is either a ghoul or a witch. The 16th century Ottoman Şeyhülislam Ebu Suud Efendi, which means Lord in European culture, has decrees about this. In this decree on the subject, Şeyhülislam Ebu Suud recommends that a person who is confirmed to be a witch be impaled with a stake in the stomach, decapitated and placed at the feet, and if none of these yield any results, burned. Things of an official document, witches are mentioned in the official Ottoman documents. Also in Balkan region, police reports are full of vampires. There was also the case of the witches of Tarnova in the Ottoman Empire. It contains allegations that Janissaries rose from their graves to haunt the people. In the testimony of the Turkish historian Reşat Ekrem Koçu, he says, before their deaths, people named Abdi Alemdar and Ali Alemdar did all kinds of evil to the people, killed, looted and raped. When the guild of Janissaries was masked, they were not executed because of their age, but died of natural causes. But they haunted the people even after their deaths. They haunt them disguised as witches. Nicholas, the witch hunter, advised the people to exhume their bodies, drive wooden stakes through their navels, and scald their hearts with boiling water to drive out these evil spirits. I'll also mention a newspaper report of an incident that took place in 1833 in the town of Tarnova in Bulgaria, which was under Turkish rule. Ahmet Şükrü Efendi, the mayor of the town, writes an official letter to the government, reports the incident, and then it's published in the official newspaper of the state. There are witches in Tarnova. They come out after sunset. They mix things like flour, oil, and honey together. They open pillows, quilts, and bundles and scatters them. They attack and rape people. To prevent this, we made a bargain with a witch hunter named Nikola. He found the witches in the cemetery. We killed them by driving stakes through their hearts and pouring boiling water over them. It was published. Ali Bek from Tolstoy's story is also inspired by this. He also named his character Ali Bek. It's like Mr. Ali because we use Bey as Mr. in Turkish. Bek reminds us Bey, so that's why it means like Mr. Ali. as Ali was the name of one of the two janissaries mentioned in the Tarnova incident. Ali Bey, who is of Turkish origin, is the one of infected old Gorcha with vampirism in this story. In other words, Tolstoy directed his paranoia of vampirism against the Turks when he was fictionalizing history. Probably Tolstoy knew about this Tarnova incident. I'm interested that he uses the names of the case. There are also references to the janissaries. This leads us to another conclusion about vampires. Until the 18th century, vampires were the subject of court records, travelogues, and religious texts. We see their modern use in the 18th century. Before that, it was not the subject of literature. It's not something associated with love. I mean, vampires become beautiful, they enter literature. In fact, it was with Bram Stoker's Dracula that the vampire myth was transformed from a folkloric element into a popular cultural element. But of course, its popularity did not start with Bram Stoker. When Heinrich August Ossenfeld wrote the poem Der Vampir in 1748, the word vampire was used for the first time. The inspiration for this poem dates back to 1731 in Serbia, when fantastic stories of a Serbian peasant named Arnold Paul rising from the dead and killing other peasants by drinking their blood spread throughout Western Europe. Its expansion to Europe was as follows. With the Treaty of Passarowitz in 1718, the territories of Bosnia, Romania, and northern Serbia came under Austrian control. During this period, Austrian officers reported on the incidents that led to belief in vampires in the region. So, they kept an official record. In the 18th century, the vampire myth became famous because vampire rumors reached their peak in East Prussia. Imagine, reports are being made by priests, scientists, medical doctors, articles are being published in the scientific journals. There are debates in Western Europe about the existence of vampires, so this issue is taken seriously. And when we talk about vampires, we can't not mention Count Dracula. The character in the novel is not real, but the character inspired by him is someone who really lived. Vlad Dracula, better known as Vlad Tepes. Vlad Tepes was a Wallachian voivode of Wallachia of Wallach origin, later called Romanian. So he was born in today's Transylvania. Today, Wallachia is the southern part of Romania. It's also where Count Dracula lived in Bram Stoker's novel. The fact that Dracula inspired the novel and that he became a historical figure goes in parallel with Ottoman history. By the 1360s, the Ottoman Turks were organizing expeditions to the Balkan lands, Wallachian Principality in the Balkans. This principality is a principality that is trying to survive between the Ottoman and Hungarian skies. They occasionally established good relations with Ottomans until 1444. There is a war between the Ottomans and the Balkan principalities in the Varna region of Bulgaria. This is the Battle of Varna. Opposing the Ottomans were the Wallachian voivodeship, the Principality of Moldavia, and small principalities like Transylvania. The Ottomans win the war. As a precautionary measure, some Balkan princes were taken as hostages. Among them is Vlad Tepes. Actually, the Dracula brothers are being held hostage, so Vlad has a brother. They were first brought to Kütahya and then to Edirne, where Turkish city is now, by the way. There is Fatih Sultan Mehmet in the Edirne palace. So, Vlad Dracula and Fatih Sultan Mehmet are in the same place. Fatih was a prince then. For 3 years, they grew up together in a palace environment into the same place. Then, Vlad returns to Wallachia. He struggles for the throne of Wallachia until the late 1450s. He seized the throne in 1458, updating the military system. He has a castle built for himself. When he takes the throne, he invites all the boyars, nobles, women, and children in the country to dinner. He captures everyone during dinner and makes them work to build his castle. Why did he do that? This is because these people captured and killed Vlad's father after the Battle of Varna. So Vlad is avenging his father. Anyway, his relationship with the Ottomans is good. He pays taxes and so on. When he becomes powerful, he stops paying taxes. Then the Ottomans send an envoy with 200 soldiers to Vlad for withholding taxes. Dracula writes a letter to Fatih saying he's in no condition. While this envoy and 200 soldiers were staying, Vlachian soldiers captured them at the place where they were staying. Vlad the Impaler impales them all. When he went on a campaign in Bulgaria, it said that he had impaled 20,000 people mixed Turkish and Bulgarians. That is where Vlad the Impaler's term impaler comes from. Normally, until then, criminals were exhibited dead in this way to make an example of them, but Vlad the Impaler is the first with the mass punishment. While Dracula was still alive, his horrible stories were being written in manuscript. Even Bram Stoker accessed these sources, and this is how he learned about Count Dracula. Before Bram Stoker, there were theater works written as the blood drinker voivode of Wallachia, but he's not depicted as a vampire but himself. Hungarian sources say that Vlad even decapitated the bird he caught and impaled it on a stake. I mean, he's that psychopathic. It's not just impalement, it's torture. To summarize the rest of his life story, I said that the soldiers came with the envoy because he had not paid his taxes to the Ottomans. Then he had them killed. Mehmet the Kankra was on campaign at the time. The year was 1461, by the way. On their way back, they go directly to Wallachia. Count Dracula also retreats to the Carpathian Mountains. The soldiers can find him. Meanwhile, Dracula makes a night raid but fails. His soldiers and Ottoman soldiers are fighting. Dracula is defeated. Then his brother was put in charge of Wallachia. Vlad defected to the Hungarians. Vlad remains a prisoner here. They are closed in the castle. He remained a prisoner until 1474. Hungarians always hold on to him. If there is a power vacuum in Wallachia, they will put Vlad in charge, which is what happens. When his brother died of the plague, Vlad was restored to the throne. He was beheaded during the war between the Romanians and the Ottomans. It's also rumored that after being brought to Istanbul and exhibited, was thrown into the Marmara Sea. By the way, his image in Romania is very different. Romania sees Count Dracula as a hero, for example, because all his life he did not touch his own people, the Romanians, and tried to unite Romania. That's why Romanians don't like the fact that Count Dracula is identified with vampire, because for Romanians to be a vampire means to be a heretic and to be resurrected. Romanians define the word Strigoi as a malevolent entity and they don't use it either. It's ominous word, like Voldemort. Of course, Count Dracula, known as a cruel ruler until Bram Stoker's novel, identifies with vampire after this novel. By the way, it's a very popular novel in its time. In fact, let me inform you that while he was writing this novel, Stoker exchanged letters with Turkologist Armenius Vambery, so he collects data very seriously. After this novel was written, vampire movies emerged with the development of cinema. The first vampire movie was Nosferatu by German director Murnau in 1922, but the vampire character in Nosferatu still doesn't quite fit the image we have today. Again, a horrible being that you don't even want to stand next to. Over time, vampires transcend the old narratives and begin to carry the ability to be good and evil. While in mythology he is nothing but a demon, the opposite of Jesus, in the movie Interview with a Vampire he appears as a good or bad vampire. Lestat is a cruel, unfeeling, preying on people. I find Lestat very similar to Dorian Gray here. Louis is also in the movie as a vampire who does not accept this fate. The tragedy, both here and in Only Lovers Left Alive, stems from the inability to escape the cursed soul that wants to be good but cannot stop the urge to drink blood. Twilight also has this. I want to be good, but I'm bad. Oh, I have to kill people. Yes, I hunt animals, but animals are crunchy, unfortunately not like human blood. Edward keeps telling Bella to stay away from me. Edward is an unhappy character, trying to be as good as he can be. By the way, while researching for this video, I kept thinking of the scene where Bella is researching vampires. That scene is a core memory for me. I'll never forget that scene. That's how I envisioned myself while doing research. And the attitude of the vampire character. I didn't have a choice. I didn't have it to be like this. I couldn't make sense of it. I didn't have a choice. I didn't want it to be like this. My incomprehension is a very secular point of view, by the way. I was saying to myself, how great you can live forever, how great you can live forever. There are millions of books you can read, millions of movies you can watch, you can live as many different lives as you want, you can create completely different stories for yourself in all the cities of the world. I mean, it's awesome, I think. But this unwanted immortality has a point. That is a material eternity. Instead of doing good deeds and dying and living forever in heaven, as our religion says, you live forever in this world. There is a material immortality. It's a secular, non-religious and despised point of view. That's why good vampires are oriented towards fate and characterized as material immortality as a curse. That's how it is. That's the vampire thing. I hope I have clarified to you. I had a lot of fun researching and drawing. I drew a vampire couple in accordance with this theme. I thought I would pick their clothes for the 18th century, a tribute to the era when vampires were popular, and for the decor I drew high Gothic windows. I hope you enjoyed it and it was a good video. See you in the next video. Take care.